Hey guys, Aunt Becca here today, and I've got chapter 2 of Chocolate by Hershey, and this chapter is called Learning a Trade. Henry Hershey had dreams for Milton just as Fanny did. He was determined that Milton should get a good education so his son could be more than a farmer or a common worker. But Milton's mother and his Aunt Mattie realized that Milton was not going to do well in school, especially if they kept moving. By the time he was 13, Milton had been to 6 different schools. Both Fanny and Mattie agreed that he should learn a trade. In those days, young workers learned a trade from someone who knew it, and they usually lived with their teacher. This was called an apprenticeship. Henry finally agreed that Milton could stop going to school, but in exchange, he set up an apprenticeship for Milton with a newspaper editor named Sam Ernst. Milton's father thought newspaper work was a noble profession for his son. It had to do with ideas and words. Besides publishing the newspaper, Mr. Ernst ran a mill and did some farming. Milton helped with the cows and set type for the newspaper. Each letter of type was made of metal, and Milton set the letters into words on a long metal tray called a galley. The galley was put into printing the press, and the press was inked, and paper was fed through to print the newspaper. Sam Ernst was a hot-tempered man who would not put up with mistakes or clumsiness. Unfortunately, Milton was sometimes guilty of both. One day, when Milton dropped a galley of type, Mr. Ernst got especially angry. He exploded and kept on yelling. Milton had a hot temper too. He pulled off his straw hat, which landed right in the press. The press jammed, and that was the end of Milton's apprenticeship. He was fired. Milton returned home, worried about how his parents would react to his failure. His father grabbed his coat and left to talk Sam Ernst into taking Milton back. But Milton's mother and his Auntie Mattie had other plans. Fanny thought Milton should learn something he could sell, and Mattie agreed. Although Sam Ernst agreed to give Milton a second chance, young Milton Hershey became an apprentice to a new trade. This time, the trade was confectionery, or candy making. Yum! Milton left home for Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to work with Joe Royer at his ice cream parlor and garden. He would spend 4 years learning how to make delicious things: candy, ice cream, and cakes. Do you like any of those things? Me too. From the very first day at Joe Royer's, Milton felt he had found what he wanted to do with his life. He loved making candy. There were no exact recipes, so he had to rely on his taste buds. Mr. Royer taught him to start with sugar, the basic ingredient in candy. Then he added water or milk, depending on the kind of candy he was making, and boiled it in a kettle. Milton learned to judge the exact moment when the copper kettle should be taken off the fire. Then Milton poured the hot, syrupy mixture onto a marble slab, where he worked it with a large wooden paddle, pulling the candy back and forth as it cooled. Milton learned what flavors appealed to most people, and he learned just how much peppermint or vanilla or almond to add to make a batch of candy taste just right. He found he had a gift for knowing exactly what to add to any candy mixture to make it better. Milton occasionally made mistakes, of course. Here's a picture of him practicing making candy. But unlike Sam Ernst, Joy Royer was patient. One night, Milton went with some friends to the Fulton Opera House near Royer's. His eyes were glued to the stage when all at once he smelled something burning. That something was peanuts. Milton had been roasting peanuts for fudge and had forgotten to turn off the machine. He rushed down to the candy shop and found peanut shells blowing around and an awful smell in the air. Mr. Royer forgave him this mistake and others, and came to regard Milton as a hard worker he could depend on. In May 1876, after 4 years of hard work and learning, Milton Hershey thought it was time to go into the candy business for himself. He talked to his mother and his aunt about his prospects. Although Milton was only 18 years old, Fanny and Maddie both agreed he should try to make it on his own. Milton didn't consult his father this time. Henry was hardly ever around. Milton's mother and father no longer lived together. They were just too different from each other. Milton's father was still part of Milton's life, but he tended to come and go. As much as he loved his father, Milton realized that his mother and Aunt Mattie were the family he could count on. Aunt Mattie presented Milton with $150 to start his own business. Fanny wanted him to stay in Lancaster, but Milton had grander ideas. The United States was celebrating its 100th birthday, and the city of Philadelphia was hosting a World's Fair in honor of the event. The fair would run from May till November and would celebrate the industries of all nations. Milton decided Philadelphia was the place for him. Well, that's the end of chapter 2, guys, and I'll see you next time. Mwah!